I think we have a lot of opportunities to do much better and to improve outcomes and improve our practice for our patients. And I think the key message that I want to share with you today is that we must take responsibility not only for the outcomes in the ICU, but also what happens after the ICU as well, so that every day on rounds, when we're taking care of our patients, we really need to focus not only what's happening day to day, but what we're going to do today that's going to ensure this patient goes back to a life worth living. Every day on rounds, we want to think about the things we can do with our nutrition and other interventions that is going to lead to creating survivors of our patients, survivors that go back to a life that's meaningful rather than victims. Instead, where so many patients are never able to return home, never able to perhaps walk again, never able to go back to the lives that they wanted when they came to us. Because our real dream and our real purpose, right, when caring for our critically ill patients is we want to ensure our patients can go home and walk down the street with the people they love again and hold their grandchildren again after they leave the ICU and have the lives back they came to us to give back to them. And of course, the good news is, overall, we are reducing mortality. ICU mortality has decreased over the last 10 years. So we are getting patients out of the ICU and saving them in the ICU much more so than ever before. But I think a key question we must ask ourselves is in critical care, and especially in our COVID-19 patients, are we winning some of the battles, but perhaps losing the war that emphasizes the quality of life as the key outcome for our patients? Is it perhaps a Pyrrhic victory for our patients, such that we so deplete the patient and so weaken the patient in their muscles and in their other cognitive abilities that by saving them, we actually end up losing their lives and not giving them a chance to have a meaningful recovery? Because although sepsis deaths have fallen by half over the last 10 years, at the same time, we haven't increased necessarily the number of people going home, but definitely increased the number of people going to rehabilitation. And so I think this is a critical part of it, that these patients aren't necessarily returning home. And the real question is, although we're improving hospital survival, how many of these patients even survive a year after ICU admission? And of course, the reality is almost half the deaths from an ICU admission date happen after they leave us in the first year. So almost half the deaths in the first year after ICU admission happen after the patient leaves the ICU in the hospital. And we don't realize that perhaps they've gone to rehabilitation and passed away before they ever returned home. And so many of our critical care trials groups around the world have emphasized that given low ICU mortality, our research and our clinical care really needs to be focusing on quality of life as the future of our future clinical trials. Because the real goal we have is to create survivors of our patients, not victims, survivors that go home and have a meaningful quality of life. Because the real question is, if your patient leaves the hospital alive, was your care successful? And I'll ask all of you a question, wish I could be in person to do it, but how many of you would like to live to be 70 and active like this? And I bet most of you would raise your hand. Or die at 100 like this, immobilized, debilitated, perhaps cognitively impaired. And this gets down to the question of quality of life versus quantity of life. And then I guess the question, I guess we'd hope we're winning battles for most of our patients, right? And maybe this isn't so common, but the reality is it is common. This is research in 40 and 50-year-old ARDS survivors. And of those, 50% of those young people did not go back to work at a year after ICU discharge. And a third of these young patients never went back to work to the jobs they did before. And Melissa, who I just told you about, she was an accountant before her illness, who you just heard speaking, and she never was able to return to work as an accountant because of the disabilities she suffered after her illness. So no one is spared from this. Young patients get it, children get it, elderly folks get it. No one is immune from this post-ICU weakness and the PIC syndrome that follows that. And in fact, 60 to 80% of patients who are on a ventilator more than a week are going to have these significant physical impairments. This is truly an epidemic for those of us in critical care, and COVID-19 is only going to make this worse as we have more and more patients who are having these long COVID syndromes. And why are we losing this quality of life war? Well, a major reason is ICU and major surgery patients can lose up to 1 kilogram of lean body mass daily. How long do you think you can lose that much muscle mass and recover and function again? It's hard enough to gain muscle when you're not sick. And of course, we know that the catabolism and the hypermetabolism could persist for months to years after critical illness. We're not evolved as humans to survive these kinds of injuries, our body doesn't know when to turn off this catabolic state. We know a burned child will remain catabolic for 2 years after critical illness. And that is truly devastating. It gives you some sense of what our patients go through. And so again, COVID-19, it may be worse. We have persistent weakness, even non-ICU subjects. And one of the challenges is even after ICU, patients can gain weight, but it's mostly fat mass they're gaining, not muscle mass. Again, the catabolic signal is not being turned off, or that we're not delivering enough calories and protein. So again, this is an epidemic and we need to be better. We need to improve for our patients the opportunities for them to have better outcomes with better clinical care. But how can we do that? Well, I think it's critical that it's going to take good personalized therapeutic nutrition. It's going to take clearly rehabilitation and perhaps some learnings from elite athletes to teach us how better to rehabilitate and exercise and use nutrition like an athlete would. Again, critical illness is like running the marathon of your life. And so I think another key message is one size does not fit all. We really need to learn to personalize our nutrition. We need to be personalizing and measuring and being objective in our nutrition, giving the right dose in the right patient at the right time of our nutrition, and measuring our patient's needs and the effects of our nutrition on the patient. So as we get towards finishing, now our patient Elijah survived, thankfully, and he started on oral nutrition. Will our ICU patients eat enough on their own? Not likely. The average post-ICU intake we know of an ICU patient is only about 700 kcals per day. So oral nutrition supplements are essential to delivering post-ICU needs. The good news, of course, is we have profoundly good data that all our patients should be getting oral nutrition supplements in the hospital. We know it reduces hospital mortality. We know it significantly reduces complications. These are meta-analyses of many studies. And every dollar you spend on the protein drinks for your patients will save $52 in hospital costs. And now we have a large randomized trial that giving high protein oral nutrition supplements after hospitalization for 3 months reduces death by half in a large randomized controlled trial. So this means we need to keep them on these oral nutrition supplements after the hospital for 3 to 6 months as well. And that's essential. This is the only way to get our patients the nutrition needs they require orally after they leave the ICU. So this is essential. And it needs to be done for a minimum of 6 months. That's what is essential. But the reality is, how many of our patients will know what it takes to recover? How many will know how to do this? Because we have opportunities to do better for our patients. And who is going to teach them? You are. You are the passionate people who have the knowledge now to improve the lives of your patients. And the reality is, ICU recovery begins the day of ICU admission, and it continues long after hospital discharge. So if we're going to create survivors of our patients that go back to a meaningful quality of life and not victims, getting patients out of the ICU is not enough. In the ICU, winning the battles against infections and sepsis and losing the battle on quality of life is not enough, because if that's the case, why do we do critical care at all if we're not going to give a meaningful life back to our patients? So how does that look if you're going to take some things away? Enteral nutrition first. If you can't get to goal in the first few days, supplemental nutrition, probiotics can be beneficial. Ramp up your protein, your calories, start slow, and then move up. And then, of course, we need oxandrolone or perhaps other anabolic agents and good exercise programs after ICU. So now I want all of you in Poland and all of you listening to realize, again, we have to take responsibilities, not just for our outcomes in the ICU, but what happens after the ICU as well.